In life, we are all faced with moments when the weight of the world seems unbearable, when the road ahead appears impossibly difficult, and when it feels as though the very foundation beneath us is crumbling. The storms of life can be overwhelming, and yet there is something far stronger than the trials we face: faith. Faith is not merely a belief that things will turn out how we want them to, nor is it an empty hope that life will suddenly become easier. No, true faith is the steadfast conviction that God is sovereign over every circumstance, that He is infinitely greater than the struggles we endure, and that His power is more than enough to carry us through the darkest of times. When life seems impossible, when your heart is broken, when your body is weak, when the fear of failure and loss consumes you, faith does not promise the absence of pain. It promises the presence of a God who walks with you through the fire. Faith means trusting in His goodness even when your circumstances shout that all hope is lost. It means clinging to His promises even when everything in your life seems to contradict them. We are not promised that the road will be easy, but we are assured that it is never traveled alone. Faith teaches us to see beyond the moment, to look past the temporary afflictions and gaze upon the eternal glory that awaits. In every moment of suffering, faith calls us to remember that the trials of this life are but a vapor compared to the joy that will be revealed in us. It calls us to trust in God's ultimate plan, knowing that He is using every hardship to shape us into the image of His Son. Overcoming life's toughest challenges requires more than just optimism or sheer willpower. It requires an unwavering trust in the power of God. It requires recognizing that there is nothing that can separate us from His love. No trial is too great, no mountain too high, and no valley too deep for the Almighty to conquer. The truth is, our faith isn't based on the size of our own strength, but on the unshakable strength of the one we place our trust in. You see, faith isn't just about enduring, it's about thriving in the midst of adversity. It's about taking every setback, every heartache, and using it as an opportunity to witness the power of God at work in your life. When you are weak, He is strong. When you are unsure, He is faithful. When you are exhausted, He provides the strength to keep going. So, do not be afraid of the challenges you face. Do not let fear paralyze you. Instead, remember that faith is not a passive resignation to your circumstances. It is an active response to the truth that God is greater than anything this world can throw at you. His love is stronger than your fear, His power greater than your weakness, and His promise more secure than any of life's uncertainties. In the end, faith is the key to unlocking the strength you need to overcome any challenge. It is not something you can muster on your own, but something that is given freely by the one who holds all things together. So, step forward in faith, knowing that God is with you and that through Him all things are possible. True faith is not a vague hope or an empty wish. It is a deep, unwavering trust in the sovereign control of God over every aspect of our lives, especially in times of difficulty. Faith is not just a feeling or a mental acknowledgement. It is a firm belief that God rules over all things, the good and the bad, the easy and the hard, the joys and the sorrows. This trust is rooted in the understanding that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and ever-present. There is nothing in this world, no situation or circumstance, that lies beyond His reach or His will. To have faith means to believe in this truth and to live as if it were the very foundation of our lives. In times of hardship, it is easy to become overwhelmed by the weight of our struggles. Our human nature tends to focus on what we can see and feel: the immediate pain, the uncertainty, the fear of failure. However, faith calls us to look beyond these fleeting moments and focus on a deeper reality, the truth that God is still in control. The storm may rage, but the one who commands the wind and the waves is with us. Our faith allows us to see through the fog of our trials to the steady hand of God, guiding us through the storm. Faith isn't just passive acceptance of our circumstances. It is an active trust in the one who can change those circumstances. But even if he doesn't, faith holds firm in the belief that he is still good and that his purposes are higher than ours. Faith teaches us to surrender our limited perspective and to trust in God's greater plan, one that we may not fully understand in the moment, but one that will ultimately bring glory to him and good to us. This kind of faith is not something that can be manufactured by human effort. It is a gift from God given to those who believe and are willing to trust in his promises. It is cultivated through a relationship with him, through prayer, through studying his word, and through walking with him daily. The more we know him, the more we come to trust in his character and his promises. The more we experience his faithfulness in our lives, the more we are able to stand firm in our faith when the winds of life try to knock us down. Moreover, faith in God's sovereignty isn't just about trusting that he is in control of the good things in life. It's about trusting that he is in control of the difficult things as well. It's easy to trust God when everything is going well, but faith is most tested when life feels uncertain or painful. It's in these moments that we are called to believe not just that God is powerful, but that his power is working for our ultimate good even when we cannot see it. Faith means trusting that the trials and struggles we face are not accidents. They are part of God's sovereign plan, and he is using them to shape us into the people he has called us to be. When we place our faith in God's sovereignty, we are freed from the pressure of trying to control everything ourselves. We stop trying to manipulate our circumstances or force outcomes that we think are best. Instead, we rest in the assurance that God knows what is best and that his ways are far higher than our own. This does not mean that we become passive or lazy. It means we take action with the understanding that ultimately the outcome is in God's hands. We do our part, but we trust him to do his. This trust is not a blind leap into the unknown. It is based on the certainty of God's character. The Bible tells us that God is good, that he is loving, and that he works all things together for the good of those who love him. Faith in God's sovereignty means believing these truths, even when everything around us seems to suggest otherwise. It is not the absence of doubt, but the choice to trust God in spite of doubt. It is the firm belief that, in the end, God's plan is better than any plan we could come up with on our own. As we grow in this understanding of God's sovereignty, our faith begins to transform the way we approach life's challenges. Instead of being consumed with fear and anxiety, we learn to rest in the knowledge that God is in control. We can face hardship with courage, knowing that it is not the end of the story. Instead of being paralyzed by uncertainty, we move forward in faith, trusting that God is leading us and that he will bring us to the place where he wants us to be. The power of faith lies not in our ability to see the future, but in our trust in the one who holds the future in his hands. In the end, faith in God's sovereignty gives us peace in the midst of chaos, strength in the face of weakness, and hope in the middle of despair. It is the foundation on which we stand when everything else around us is shaking. It is the lifeline that pulls us through the storms of life, reminding us that no matter what we face, we are never alone. God is sovereign, and his faithfulness is unshakable. With this faith, we can face anything because we know that our God is greater than our challenges and he will see us through. Life is filled with challenges that often seem insurmountable. There are moments when we are forced to confront difficult situations, times of sickness, loss, disappointment, or failure. During these times, it's natural to feel overwhelmed and powerless, as though the weight of the world is too much to bear. But the power of faith teaches us that we do not face these challenges alone. Faith assures us that God is present with us, walking beside us every step of the way. It is through faith that we learn to endure, not by our own strength, but by drawing from the infinite strength of God. Faith does not promise that life will be free of pain or struggle. In fact, the Bible is clear that we will face trials in this world, but it does promise that in the midst of these trials, God will never leave us. Faith teaches us to trust in the presence of God even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. It encourages us to look beyond our circumstances and to recognize that God is at work, even in the most challenging moments of life. Our faith is not based on our circumstances, but on the unchanging truth of who God is. When we face life's toughest challenges, faith reminds us that we are not defined by our struggles. We are not failures because we experience hardship, nor are we defined by our weaknesses. Instead, faith teaches us that we are defined by our relationship with God. In Him, we find our true identity. Our value is not tied to our success or our failures, but to the fact that we are His children, loved unconditionally by a God who is always with us. In times of difficulty, faith calls us to keep our eyes on God and to trust in His power to carry us through. The challenges we face are real and they hurt, but they are not the end of the story. Faith encourages us to believe that God is using our struggles to refine us, to make us stronger, and to draw us closer to Him. It is in the difficult moments that our character is shaped and our faith deepened. God is not distant or passive in our suffering. He is active, using every circumstance for our good and His glory. Faith also teaches us that we do not have to rely on our own strength to overcome challenges. So often, we try to muster up enough courage or willpower to get through life's difficulties, but faith reminds us that our strength is not sufficient on its own. The Bible tells us that when we are weak, God is strong. His strength is made perfect in our weakness. This means that we don't have to face life's toughest challenges alone, trying to figure everything out on our own. Instead, we can rely on God's strength, knowing that He will empower us to endure. In the moments when we feel we can't go any further, faith reminds us that God will provide the strength we need to press on. Moreover, faith gives us the perspective we need to endure suffering. It is easy to become fixated on our immediate pain, to allow our hearts to become consumed by worry, fear, or frustration. But faith helps us to see beyond the temporary. It teaches us that our suffering is not meaningless. Every trial is an opportunity to grow in Christ-likeness, to trust God more deeply, and to experience His presence in ways we never would in easier times. The trials of life are not wasted. They are used by God to refine us, to purify our hearts, and to teach us to depend on Him. Faith allows us to view our struggles not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth, knowing that God is using them for His purposes. In addition to strengthening us, faith also gives us hope. When everything in life seems hopeless, faith assures us that God is at work and that He will ultimately bring good out of our circumstances. The challenges we face may seem impossible to overcome, but faith teaches us that God specializes in the impossible. With God, all things are possible. Faith gives us the confidence to believe that He will work things out according to His plan, even when we can't see how or when. It allows us to trust in His timing, knowing that He is never late and that He will never leave us or forsake us. Even in the most difficult moments, faith brings peace. It is not a peace that comes from understanding why things are happening, but a peace that comes from knowing that God is in control. Faith enables us to rest in His sovereign care, to trust that He will guide us through the storm. This peace is not the absence of trouble, but the assurance that, no matter what happens, God is with us, and He will never let us go. When we rely on our own understanding, we can easily become anxious and fearful, but when we place our faith in God, we can find rest, knowing that He is sovereign and trustworthy. Faith teaches us to endure not because we are strong, but because God is. It reminds us that we don't have to face life's toughest challenges on our own. When we feel weak, God is strong. When we feel like giving up, God gives us the strength to keep going. In every trial, faith calls us to trust in God's presence, His power, and His purposes. With faith, we can face anything, knowing that we are never alone and that God is always faithful to carry us through. Overcoming life's toughest challenges requires more than just optimism or sheer willpower. It requires an unwavering trust in the power of God. Too often, we face the storms of life with the belief that we can overcome them through our own efforts if we just try harder, if we just push through, if we just summon enough strength from within. While there is certainly value in perseverance, the kind of strength that truly sustains us in the midst of life's most difficult moments is not found within ourselves, but in the power of God. This is the essence of faith, recognizing that we are not sufficient on our own, but that we serve a God who is more than enough for whatever we face. True faith calls us to rely on the strength of God rather than our own. It teaches us to recognize that we cannot fight life's battles by our own might. There are moments when the obstacles in front of us feel insurmountable, when the challenges before us are so overwhelming that we feel as though we are sinking. It is in these moments that faith calls us to look not at our weakness, but at God's power. The Bible reminds us in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. In our weakness, God's power is magnified." When we acknowledge our inability to overcome on our own, we open ourselves to experiencing the fullness of God's strength in our lives. This is not a faith that simply tells us to hang on and hope for the best. It is a faith that actively believes that God's power is greater than our struggles, and that His ability to help us is infinitely greater than our own. It is a faith that rests in the knowledge that God is able to do far more than we could ever ask or imagine, according to His power at work within us. When we face challenges, this faith assures us that we do not have to bear the weight of them alone. We are invited to lean into God's strength, to trust that He will provide us with what we need to press on, even when the road ahead seems too difficult to walk. Faith, therefore, is not a passive resignation to hardship. It is not about simply accepting what comes without expecting any change. Instead, it is an active, confident trust in God's ability to change circumstances, to bring light into darkness, and to make a way where there seems to be no way. When we place our faith in God, we are placing our trust in the one who holds all power and authority, who has the ability to calm the storms and heal the broken. In Him, we find a source of strength that is never exhausted and a refuge that is never shaken. At the same time, true faith does not just rely on God's power to overcome immediate obstacles, but it also holds fast to the belief that God's ultimate purpose will always prevail, regardless of the circumstances. Life's toughest challenges often bring with them a sense of uncertainty about the future. We can easily be consumed with fear, wondering how things will turn out, whether things will ever get better, or if we will ever find the strength to overcome. But faith teaches us to look beyond the temporary and to fix our eyes on the eternal. Even when the situation seems dire, even when the path is unclear, faith assures us that God's purposes are higher than our understanding and that His plan will not fail. Faith calls us to trust in His sovereignty, that He is in control of everything, even when it feels as though things are out of control. The Bible reminds us that God works all things together for the good of those who love Him, Romans 8:28. This is a powerful promise that should shape our response to life's difficulties. It does not mean that everything that happens to us will be good in and of itself, but it does mean that God will use every circumstance for a greater purpose. Whether we understand it or not, God is working in and through our struggles to shape us, refine us, and ultimately bring glory to Himself. Faith calls us to trust in that process, even when it is painful, because we know that God's ultimate plan is always better than anything we could have imagined. Faith does not remove the challenges we face, but it provides the perspective we need to endure them. It helps us to see that there is a bigger picture at work, and that even in our suffering, God is moving us towards something far greater than we can comprehend. In this way, faith is not just a means of survival, it is a means of transformation. It is through faith that we are able to face challenges head on, knowing that every difficulty is an opportunity for growth, and that God is using it to mold us into the people He has called us to be. It is through faith that we gain the strength to keep going, not because we are strong, but because we know that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Faith provides the foundation upon which we can stand firm in the face of life's storms. It assures us that, no matter how fierce the winds may blow or how high the waves may rise, God is with us. It is the confidence that the one who has overcome the world is the one who holds us in His hands. It is this faith that enables us to look at our challenges with hope, not because we can see the end of the storm, but because we know that God's strength is greater than any obstacle. Faith gives us a strength that comes not from within, but from the very power of God. It teaches us to stand firm, knowing that when we are weak, God's strength is more than enough. It assures us that God is working in every situation, using even the most difficult challenges for our good and His glory. This is the power of faith, not just to survive the storms, but to thrive in them. It is the unwavering belief that God is bigger than our circumstances, and that His strength is all we need to overcome life's toughest challenges. You said, expend 4 keynote no with 700 words, but not add any heading and closing sentence, ChatGPT said. Faith is not just a passive acceptance of whatever comes our way, nor is it an empty hope that things will improve without any action on our part. Faith is a living, active response to God's promises and His presence in our lives. When we face life's toughest challenges, faith calls us to an active trust in God's power and His faithfulness. It requires us to hold on to His promises even when the evidence of our circumstances suggests otherwise. Faith is not about pretending everything is fine or forcing ourselves to ignore our struggles. It's about believing that, in the midst of difficulty, God is working for our good, that He is greater than our circumstances, and that His plan is better than any plan we could come up with on our own. It is easy to lose sight of this when the difficulties of life weigh heavily upon us. In moments of hardship, we often find ourselves focused entirely on the problem, the pain, the disappointment, the uncertainty. We can become overwhelmed by the immediate situation, and our faith can falter when it seems that nothing is changing. However, true faith encourages us to look beyond what we can see and to focus on the eternal truths of God's Word. Faith teaches us to trust in what we know to be true about God, even when everything around us seems to suggest otherwise. It helps us to see beyond the temporary circumstances and to remember that God is faithful, that He is good, and that He has a plan that is far greater than we can comprehend. In the hardest times, faith doesn't deny the difficulty, but it chooses to place its trust in a God who is bigger than the problem. When we trust in God's faithfulness, we are able to endure even the most difficult challenges. Faith doesn't remove the pain, but it provides the strength to press on. It is through faith that we are able to persevere, knowing that God is with us in every moment. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:16-18, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." Paul's words remind us that the difficulties we face in this life, no matter how great, are temporary. They are light in comparison to the eternal glory that awaits us. Faith helps us to see our struggles from a different perspective, to view them not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for God to do something in us and through us. Faith also empowers us to take action. It's not just about waiting for God to change our circumstances, but about trusting in His ability to lead us, to guide us, and to give us the wisdom to make the right decisions. In the midst of trials, faith encourages us to take the next step, even when we don't have all the answers. It assures us that God is not only with us in our waiting, but that He is actively working in our hearts and lives. Faith gives us the courage to face the unknown, to step into situations that seem overwhelming, and to trust that God will equip us to face whatever comes our way. It gives us the confidence to act, knowing that our steps are ordered by the Lord and that He is leading us toward His ultimate purpose for our lives. Additionally, faith teaches us to trust in God's timing. One of the hardest aspects of enduring life's challenges is the waiting. Waiting for a breakthrough, waiting for healing, waiting for restoration, waiting for answers. These can feel like some of the most difficult times. But faith assures us that God is never late. His timing is perfect, and He works all things according to His plan. Even when we cannot see the way forward, faith reminds us that God sees the big picture. He knows what is best for us, and He is working behind the scenes to bring about His good purpose in our lives. Faith helps us to trust that, even in the waiting, God is still at work. It teaches us to trust that His plans are better than our own, and that He will make all things beautiful in His time. When we trust in God's timing, we are freed from the need to control everything or to rush ahead of God's plan. This doesn't mean we are passive, just waiting for something to happen. Rather, it means that we trust God's timing enough to rest in His care and to wait with hope and expectation. Faith enables us to find peace in the waiting, knowing that God has a purpose in every season of our lives. Whether the answer comes immediately or whether we have to wait years for it, faith teaches us to trust that God is working in the waiting. It reminds us that His timing is always perfect, and that in the end His plan will be worth the wait. Finally, faith encourages us to look to God's promises rather than to our circumstances. The world around us often tries to define our reality based on what we can see and feel. When life gets tough, it can be easy to forget that we are not defined by our circumstances. Our worth, our value, and our hope are found not in what we can see, but in what God has promised. The Bible is filled with promises that we can cling to in the hardest times, promises of peace, of strength, of protection, and of provision. Faith calls us to hold fast to these promises, to stand on them even when everything else around us seems to be shaking. In times of difficulty, faith reminds us that we are never alone. God promises that He will never leave us nor forsake us, Hebrews 13:5. He is with us in every trial, walking beside us, providing for us and strengthening us. When our hearts are broken, faith tells us that He is near to the brokenhearted, Psalm 34:18. When we feel weak, faith assures us that His power is made perfect in our weakness, 2 Corinthians 12:9. When we are uncertain of the future, faith reminds us that God knows the plans He has for us, plans to give us a hope and a future, Jeremiah 29:11. These promises are the foundation of our faith, and they give us the strength to face whatever comes our way. Faith is the assurance that no matter what happens in this life, God's promises are true, and He will fulfill them in His time. Faith is often misunderstood as a simple belief that things will eventually work out the way we want them to. But in reality, true faith goes much deeper. It is not about trusting that God will give us everything we ask for, but about trusting in His sovereignty and goodness, regardless of what happens. Faith is rooted in the knowledge that God knows what is best for us, even when we cannot see the way forward. When life presents us with challenges, faith doesn't just wish for an easy way out or a quick solution. Instead, it looks beyond the current circumstances and focuses on the character of God, trusting that He is in control and that He will work things out for His glory and our good. This type of faith gives us the strength to endure trials and persevere through the hardest of times, not because we understand why they are happening, but because we trust in the One who does. In times of difficulty, it is natural to question why we are facing certain challenges. We may find ourselves asking, why me, or why now, but faith teaches us that our struggles are not random, nor are they meaningless. Every trial we face is an opportunity for God to work in us, shaping us and refining us into the people He has called us to be. Faith shifts our perspective, helping us to see that even in our most painful moments, God is at work. The Bible tells us that God uses all things, even our suffering, to mold us into the image of Christ. James 1:2-4 tells us to count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. This is the transformative power of faith. It helps us to understand that our struggles are not obstacles, but opportunities for spiritual growth. Through faith, we can endure hardships knowing that God is using them to strengthen our character and refine our hearts. Moreover, faith calls us to look beyond the immediate and to see the bigger picture. Life's challenges often seem insurmountable when we are caught up in the emotions and the chaos of the moment. It is easy to become fixated on the problem, to feel overwhelmed and defeated. But faith teaches us to lift our eyes and see things from God's perspective. In Romans 8:18, Paul writes, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." Faith helps us to recognize that the temporary difficulties we face are not the final word. They do not define our future, and they certainly do not determine our worth. When we look beyond the present pain and focus on the eternal glory that awaits us, our perspective changes. Faith enables us to endure suffering with hope, knowing that what is coming is far greater than anything we can experience in this life. The pain we face now is momentary, but the joy we will experience in eternity is eternal. Faith is also deeply connected to the idea of trust. Trusting God means acknowledging that He knows what is best, even when we cannot understand why things are happening the way they are. This is not an easy thing to do, especially when we are in the midst of hardship. Our natural inclination is often to try to take control of the situation, to figure out a solution on our own. But faith calls us to release that control and trust in God's wisdom and timing. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Trusting God in the face of uncertainty requires surrender. It requires letting go of our need to know all the answers and trusting that God will lead us through the storm. Even when the path ahead seems unclear, faith assures us that God is guiding us, and His plan is better than anything we could plan for ourselves. Another critical aspect of faith is its ability to give us hope, even in the darkest of times. Life can sometimes feel like a series of battles, with one challenge after another threatening to knock us down. In these moments, it can be easy to lose hope. But faith reminds us that hope is not based on our circumstances, but on the character of God. Hebrews 10:23 says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for He who promised is faithful." The faithfulness of God is the foundation of our hope. We can hope in God's promises because He has never failed, and He will not fail us now. No matter how bleak the situation may seem, faith teaches us that God is still working, and He will bring about good in His time. This hope is not wishful thinking. It is a confident expectation that God will fulfill His promises to us, no matter what we face. When we hold on to this hope, it anchors our souls and gives us the strength to continue moving forward, even when the road is tough. Finally, faith teaches us that we are not alone in our struggles. One of the most powerful truths of the Christian faith is that God is with us in every moment. In Psalm 23, David writes, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Faith assures us that God is always present, even in the darkest moments of life. He does not abandon us when things get tough. He is right there, walking with us, offering His comfort, guidance, and strength. Knowing that God is with us provides a deep sense of peace and security, even when everything else around us seems uncertain. Faith helps us to trust in His presence and to rely on His strength, knowing that we are never alone in our struggles. No matter how difficult the challenge may be, we can take comfort in the fact that God is walking beside us, carrying us when we are weak and guiding us toward victory. Faith is not simply a passive belief that things will improve, but a powerful, active trust in God's goodness and sovereignty. It enables us to endure life's toughest challenges with hope, knowing that God is using every circumstance for His glory and our good. Faith gives us the strength to persevere through the hardest times, to trust in God's timing, and to rely on His presence. It is through faith that we can overcome life's obstacles and become the people God has called us to be. When we place our trust in Him, we find the strength to face anything, knowing that God is faithful and that His plan is always better than our own. In the end, faith is the bedrock upon which we stand when everything else seems to crumble. It is not a passive resignation to life's difficulties, but an active trust in the promises of God. Through faith, we are able to face life's toughest challenges, not in our own strength, but in the unshakable power of God. Even when the storms of life rage, we can rest in the assurance that God is sovereign, that He is with us, and that He will never leave us. His purposes for us are far greater than anything we can imagine, and His strength is more than enough to carry us through every trial. When life is difficult, faith calls us to look beyond our circumstances and trust in the character of God, His goodness, His faithfulness, and His perfect timing. It teaches us that our struggles are not in vain, but that God uses them to refine us, to mold us, and to draw us closer to Him. Faith gives us hope in the midst of despair, strength in our weakness, and peace in our anxiety. So no matter what you face today, remember this: you are not alone. You do not have to rely on your own strength to overcome. Faith empowers you to trust in God's greater plan, to endure with perseverance, and to rise above the challenges you face, knowing that He is with you every step of the way. Keep your eyes fixed on Him, for He is the source of your strength, your hope, and your victory. When you walk by faith, you can be confident that in the end you will overcome.